Welcome to our podcast, where we explore some of the most gripping true crime stories. Julie Lewis was just 18 years old when her life took a tragic turn. She was from Payette, Idaho, a charming town renowned for its warm-hearted residents and scenic beauty. Julie was a high school senior admired for both her looks and her smarts. She had big dreams of attending college and escaping the difficulties she faced at home. Her life had not been easy. When Julie was just 14, her mother passed away from cancer, creating a deep void in her life. Her father, Tony Lewis, a police officer, worked long hours and was often absent. Julie frequently felt isolated and began seeking the company of older men, hoping to find the stability and comfort she lacked. Some saw her actions as manipulative, believing she used her looks and charm to her advantage. Others thought she was merely trying to navigate a difficult world as best as she could. At school, Julie excelled as an honor roll student. Her friends saw her as ambitious and driven, frequently discussing her future aspirations. She planned to study business at the University of Idaho and hoped to eventually run her own company. Julie's teachers recognized her potential and frequently commended her for her hard work and dedication. In the days before her death, she was focused on preparing for her high school graduation, having purchased a new dress for the event and eagerly anticipating the ceremony. Julie shared her summer plans with her friends, which included trips to the local mall, movie outings, and time spent at the nearby Snake River. She also worked part-time at a local diner, saving money for college. Julie was well-liked by her co-workers and customers for her friendly and outgoing nature. Despite her challenges, she made an effort to stay positive and had a close-knit group of friends who supported her. They often spent time at local spots like the Payette skate park and the community swimming pool. Julie was also active in her school's drama club, where she enjoyed both acting and working behind the scenes. Despite her big dreams, Julie's life was tragically cut short. Julie had many plans and ambitions that she never had the chance to fulfill. Her death stunned the small town of Payette, leaving the community to ponder what might have been. On the morning of June 5, 2012, Tony Lewis returned home after finishing his night shift as a police officer. Tony anticipated finding Julie still asleep, but instead, he was met with a horrifying scene. Julie's lifeless body was found on the floor of her bedroom. The room was a mess, with items strewn about. Julie had been brutally attacked, bludgeoned with a rock from outside the house, and then strangled with a belt. Tony was overwhelmed with shock and devastation, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. Despite his grief and panic, he managed to call 911 to report the crime. His voice shook as he described the situation to the dispatcher. Despite his experience as a police officer, he was unprepared for such a personal tragedy. News of Julie's murder rapidly spread through the small town of Payette. Payette had not experienced a murder in over 20 years, leaving the community in deep shock. Julie was well known and well liked, and her death was a significant blow to the town. When the first responders arrived, they found Tony outside, overwhelmed and in tears. Inside Julie's room, the scene was gruesome. Blood was splattered on the walls, and signs of a violent struggle were evident. Julie's face was bruised, and there were marks around her neck from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used in the attack was found nearby, stained with blood. The paramedics pronounced Julie dead at the scene. Tony watched in despair as the responders worked, overwhelmed by grief and struggling to understand how anyone could do this to his daughter. Neighbors began to gather outside the Lewis home, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances. Neighbors whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what had happened. Local news reporters quickly arrived, their cameras and microphones documenting the tragic scene. They interviewed residents who shared their shock and sadness. Julie's friends and classmates were heartbroken by the news. Many had seen her just the day before at school, laughing and discussing their future plans. Now, those plans would never come to fruition. School counselors were brought in to support students through their grief. The whole town mourned the loss of a bright young life cut short. On the morning of June 5, 2012, the police arrived swiftly at the Lewis home. Heading the investigation was Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts, a seasoned investigator renowned for her thoroughness and commitment. With a history of solving challenging cases, she was determined to secure justice for Julie. The crime scene was horrific. Julie's bedroom was in disarray, with items scattered everywhere. Blood was spattered on the walls, and signs of a violent struggle were clear. Julie's body was found lying on the floor, Her face was bruised, and her neck showed marks from the belt used to strangle her. The rock used to bludgeon her lay nearby, stained with blood. Detective Roberts and her team began their careful investigation. Detective Roberts, with Officer Olson Benson, a local officer with 15 years of experience, began by securing the area to avoid contaminating evidence. They meticulously photographed the scene, documenting every detail. They used luminol to reveal any hidden bloodstains and collected fingerprints from various surfaces. The investigators carefully bagged the rock and belt as crucial evidence. Detective Roberts immediately observed several details, including a slightly open window in Julie's room, which suggested that someone might have exited through it. Scratches on the windowsill suggested the killer might have climbed in or out through the window. Footprints in the garden soil outside indicated recent activity. The team interviewed Tony Lewis, who remained in shock. Tony recounted discovering Julie and calling 911, his grief evident and deeply affecting Detective Roberts. Despite his emotional turmoil, he provided all the information he could, hoping it would aid in catching his daughter's killer. Local news outlets, including the Payette Times, extensively covered the story. Reporters interviewed residents and closely tracked every development. The town was gripped by fear and sadness, struggling to accept that such a brutal crime could occur in their peaceful community. As the investigation progressed, Detective Roberts and her team worked tirelessly. They analyzed the collected evidence, searching for clues that might lead to the murderer. They investigated any potential connections Julie might have had with known criminals and reviewed her recent activities. The community rallied around the police, offering strong support. Residents brought food and coffee to the officers working long hours, while local businesses displayed posters offering rewards for information leading to the arrest of Julie's killer. The town of Payette, once peaceful and serene, now united in their quest for justice. The first suspect the police investigated was Harold Henderson, a 70-year-old retired used car salesman living in Payette. Harold was well known in town for his flashy personality and competitive nature. Despite his age, he had a reputation for being charming and affluent, making him a prominent figure in the local social scene. A widower, Harold lived alone in a large house filled with memorabilia from his younger years. Harold's connection to Julie Lewis was revealed quickly. He had been romantically involved with her. Some residents of Payette were aware of their relationship and whispered about the unusual pairing. Harold's interest in Julie raised eyebrows, but in a small town, secrets often linger. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Harold in for questioning on June 6, 2012, seeking to understand the nature of his relationship with Julie and to determine if he had a motive for her murder. Harold arrived at the police station dressed neatly, his demeanor calm but somewhat defensive. During the interrogation, he acknowledged his relationship with Julie but denied any involvement in her death. He stated that their relationship was consensual and began only after she turned 18, emphasizing that he cared deeply for her. Harold's competitive nature, particularly in relation to his twin brother Alan, suggested a potential motive. Both Harold and Alan had a history of rivalry and had been competing for Julie's attention. As Detective Roberts questioned him about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Harold's calm and confident demeanor started to falter. Harold claimed he was at home watching a rerun of NCIS on CBS at the time of the murder. He insisted he had no motive to harm Julie and was shocked by her death. However, his answers were vague, and he was unable to provide a solid alibi. The police examined Harold's financial records and found that he had been giving Julie money regularly, which could have caused tension if he suspected she was manipulating him. Additionally, Harold's phone records revealed multiple calls and messages to Julie in the days leading up to her death, suggesting frequent communication. Despite his denials, the police believed Harold had both motive and opportunity. His competitive history with Alan and his romantic involvement with Julie created a troubling profile. The investigators closely monitored Harold, watching for any inconsistencies in his story and waiting for evidence that could directly link him to the murder. As the investigation progressed, Harold stayed at the center of suspicion. His flashy personality, competitive streak, and connection with Julie kept him in the spotlight. The town of Payette followed the case closely, eager to see the truth behind Julie's tragic death unfold. The second suspect in the investigation was Alan Henderson, Harold's twin brother. At 70 years old, Alan was a retired high school history teacher known for his intellect and dedication to teaching. He was well respected and liked in Payette. Alan was known for his calm and scholarly demeanor, a sharp contrast to his more flamboyant brother. He had never married and was seen as a solitary bachelor who enjoyed reading and participating in community events. Despite his age, Alan had a charismatic personality that drew people of all ages to him. He enjoyed attending local book clubs and giving lectures at the town library. The police discovered that, like his brother, Alan had also been romantically involved with Julie Lewis. The news of Alan's involvement with Julie surprised many, as he was seen as a reserved and dignified figure. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson brought Alan in for questioning on June 7, 2012, to explore his relationship with Julie and any possible motives. Alan arrived at the police station looking composed, dressed in a tweed jacket that reflected his scholarly background. During the interrogation, Alan acknowledged his relationship with Julie but insisted it was purely platonic. He explained that he valued her company and admired her brightness and ambition. Although his affection for Julie was clear, he denied any romantic involvement. Detective Roberts questioned Alan about his whereabouts on the night of Julie's murder. Alan said he was at home, working on a lecture for the local historical society. He mentioned reading a book on the Civil War, a subject he was passionate about. However, Alan's alibi was weak, as he lived alone and had no witnesses to verify his story. During the interrogation, he remained calm but appeared deeply saddened, expressing disbelief over Julie's death. Alan fully cooperated with the police, providing his phone records and access to his home. While nothing suspicious was found at his residence, investigators continued to examine his interactions with Julie. They also interviewed people who knew Alan to gather more information. His colleagues and former students spoke highly of him, describing him as a devoted teacher with a deep commitment to education. Despite his calm demeanor, the potential betrayal by Julie might have stirred a strong emotional reaction. As the investigation continued, Alan remained a key suspect. Alan's scholarly nature and seeming innocence stood in stark contrast to the dark motives that emerged. The police persisted in exploring every lead, resolute in uncovering the truth behind Julie's murder and the Henderson brothers' involvement. The third suspect in the investigation was Julie's father, Tony Lewis. Tony, 45, was a police officer in Payette, Idaho. Known for his protective nature, he was a well-liked figure in the community. Over the years, Tony had grown close to the Henderson brothers, often serving as a mediator between them. Tony's connection to Julie was clear, as he was her father and lived next door to Alan Henderson. The police had to consider all possibilities, including the unsettling thought that Tony might be involved. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts and Officer Olson Benson decided to question Tony on June 8, 2012. Tony, still reeling from the shock of discovering his daughter's body, arrived at the police station looking exhausted and grief-stricken. During the interrogation, he detailed his actions on the night of the murder. Tony explained that he had been working a night shift, a routine he maintained to support Julie after her mother's death. He insisted he had no motive to harm his daughter and was heartbroken over her death. Detective Roberts inquired about his relationship with the Henderson brothers. Tony acknowledged that he was aware of the Henderson brothers' interest in Julie and had tried to mediate their rivalry, which had caused tension in the neighborhood. Despite this, he was firm in his denial of any involvement in the crime. The police examined Tony's background and found no history of violence or misconduct. His colleagues described him as a dedicated officer and loving father. Nonetheless, investigators had to consider the possibility that Tony's protective instincts might have pushed him to a breaking point. Tony provided his phone records and fully cooperated with the investigation. The records indicated he was on duty at the time of the murder, but the police needed to confirm this alibi thoroughly. They reviewed surveillance footage from the police station and verified Tony's presence there during the critical hours. The police interviewed neighbors and friends of Tony, most of whom described him as a devoted father deeply affected by his wife's death and committed to giving Julie a better life. Some, however, noted that Tony had become more stressed and irritable in recent months, likely due to the pressures of raising a teenager on his own. Despite Tony's grief and willingness to cooperate, the police had to consider all possibilities. His close proximity to the crime scene and his protective nature were important factors in the investigation. Detective Roberts and her team continued to scrutinize every piece of evidence, understanding that solving the case required examining every angle, no matter how difficult. As the investigation progressed, Tony remained under close scrutiny. The small town of Payette watched with hope for answers and justice for Julie. The police were committed to finding the truth, and if Tony had any involvement, it would be revealed through their persistent efforts. On June 10, 2012, around 3 p.m., new evidence emerged. The weather was warm and sunny, typical for early summer in Payette. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts received a call from a local hiker who had discovered something unusual near the Snake River. The hiker had been walking his dog when he spotted a small bag concealed under some rocks. Detective Roberts and Officer Olson Benson quickly went to the location. They discovered a black bag containing a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. The items were promptly collected and added to the evidence. The police considered them potentially crucial in solving Julie's murder. At the station, the forensic team began examining the shirt and gloves. The blood on the shirt was identified as Julie's, marking a significant breakthrough. The gloves were tested for fingerprints, and the results matched those of Harold Henderson. This discovery shifted the focus back to Harold, who had previously denied being near the crime scene. Detective Roberts and her team revisited Harold's alibi and found inconsistencies in his account. Further analysis of Harold's phone records revealed that he had been near Julie's house during the time of the murder, contradicting his earlier claim of being at home watching TV. The new evidence led the police to search Harold's home again. This time, they discovered a hidden compartment in his garage containing several suspicious items, including a second pair of gloves and a belt resembling the one used to strangle Julie. These findings painted a clearer picture of Harold's possible involvement. As the investigation continued, the police interviewed additional witnesses and learned that Harold had been seen arguing with Julie the day before her death. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, reported hearing raised voices and seeing Harold leave Julie's house looking angry. With this new evidence, Detective Roberts felt they were getting closer to the truth. The police brought Harold in for another round of questioning. This time, Harold was less confident. Faced with the evidence, he grew defensive and had trouble keeping his earlier composure. Meanwhile, the forensic team kept analyzing the evidence, searching for any additional clues. They employed advanced methods such as DNA testing and fiber analysis to make sure nothing was missed. Their thorough investigation uncovered more connections between Harold and the crime. By the end of the week, the police were confident they had gathered enough evidence to make an arrest. The discovery of the bag near the Snake River proved to be the crucial breakthrough. The town of Payette waited anxiously for justice. On June 12, 2012, the police were prepared to make an arrest. Detective Kelly Breezy Roberts had assembled the evidence linking Harold Henderson to the murder. At 70, Harold was a retired used car salesman known for his flamboyant personality and competitive nature. Although his charm and wealth made him a well-liked figure in Payette, his rivalry with his twin brother Alan and his involvement with Julie Lewis revealed a more troubling side. Harold had been vying with Alan for Julie's affection. He had regularly given her money and felt betrayed when he discovered her plan to blackmail him and Alan. On the night of June 4th, Harold confronted Julie at her home. The argument escalated into violence, prompting Harold to use a rock from outside to bludgeon Julie and then strangle her with a belt. Fueled by anger and betrayal, Harold committed the brutal murder. Detective Roberts uncovered inconsistencies in Harold's alibi and found key evidence, such as the blood-stained shirt and gloves, that connected him to the crime. The DNA and fingerprints on the gloves matched Harold's, and the blood on the shirt was identified as Julie's. Additionally, surveillance footage placed Harold near Julie's house at the time of the murder. On the morning of June 12th, Detective Roberts and Officer Olson Benson went to Harold's house to make the arrest. They arrived at Harold's house at 9 a.m., finding him at home. When informed he was under arrest for Julie's murder, Harold appeared shocked but offered no resistance. He was handcuffed and taken to the police station. At the station, Harold was formally charged with murder. He reacted with disbelief and anger, maintaining his innocence and claiming that the evidence had been planted. Despite Harold's protests, the overwhelming evidence confirmed his guilt in the eyes of the police. Julie's father, Tony Lewis, was informed of the arrest. He was deeply distressed, but also relieved that the police had identified the person responsible for his daughter's death. The town of Payette, which had been closely following the investigation, experienced a blend of shock and relief. It was hard for them to accept that someone they knew so well could commit such a horrific crime. As Harold was taken into custody, the town hoped for justice for Julie. Julie's friends and family came together to support one another, cherishing memories of her beauty, intelligence, and aspirations for a brighter future. While Harold's arrest provided some closure, the pain of losing Julie lingered. With strong evidence against Harold, the police felt certain they had identified the right person. The case now proceeded to court, where Harold would face trial for his actions. The community awaited the trial with bated breath, hoping for a verdict that would deliver justice for Julie. Harold Henderson's trial commenced on July 15, 2012, at Payette County Court. The courtroom was packed with Julie Lewis's family and local residents, all keen to witness justice. Local news outlets, including the Payette Times and KTVB Channel 7, provided extensive coverage, keeping the community informed about the trial's developments. The prosecutor, Emily Hackle Matchwork, 38, was recognized for her powerful courtroom presence and commitment to justice. Hackle Matchwork presented a compelling case against Harold Henderson, highlighting the blood-stained shirt and gloves found near the Snake River, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, and surveillance footage that placed him at Julie's house the night of the murder. She portrayed the crime as a violent act fueled by Harold's rage and betrayal, emphasizing his rivalry with his twin brother and his manipulative behavior towards Julie as key motives for the murder. Drew Nils, the defense attorney, argued that the evidence against Harold Henderson was circumstantial and did not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Nils, known for his work on high-profile cases, suggested that Harold's emotional state and past arguments with Julie were not sufficient to establish his involvement in the crime. He contended that the case lacked direct evidence linking Harold to the murder. Drew Nils worked to undermine the prosecution's case by suggesting that the evidence might point to another suspect. He raised doubts about the reliability of the forensic evidence and argued that the possibility of someone else committing the murder couldn't be ruled out. Throughout the trial, Julie's family, including her father Tony Lewis, attended daily. Despite his exhaustion, Tony remained determined to see justice served for his daughter. The jury's deliberations were intense, reflecting the gravity of the case and the emotional impact on those involved. After several weeks of hearing testimonies and examining evidence, they reached a verdict on August 5, 2012. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge prepared to announce the decision that would determine Harold Henderson's fate. Harold Henderson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict brought a mixture of relief and sorrow to the courtroom. While Julie's family continued to mourn her loss, they felt a sense of justice had been served. The community, which had followed the case closely, shared in the emotional resolution of the trial. On August 12, 2012, Harold Henderson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge David Thompson emphasized the heinous nature of the crime, highlighting the brutality and betrayal that characterized Harold's actions. The sentence was viewed as a just outcome for the crime, bringing a sense of closure to the community. Payette, having been deeply affected by the violence, began the process of healing, reflecting on the impact of the case and the loss of Julie. Julie's friends and family dedicated themselves to celebrating her life and preserving her dreams, ensuring that her memory remained a positive force. The trial underscored the consequences of violence and highlighted the community's commitment to justice. As the town of Payette began to recover, there was a collective effort to move forward while honoring Julie's legacy. The town of Payette, with its close-knit community and small-town charm, was deeply shaken by Julie Lewis's murder and the ensuing dramatic court case. The violence and betrayal revealed during the trial left a lasting impact on the town. Tony Lewis, Julie's father, struggled to come to terms with the loss of his daughter, while the community worked to heal and rebuild from the tragedy. Tony's new role as an advocate for awareness and prevention helped him find a sense of purpose amid his grief. The community rallied around his initiatives, which not only paid tribute to Julie's memory, but also fostered important discussions about safety and emotional well-being. Harold Henderson's life drastically changed following his conviction. Transferred to the Idaho State Penitentiary, he began serving his life sentence without parole. His case drew significant attention, making him a well-known inmate, yet he chose to maintain a low profile while in prison. Harold's once flamboyant personality gave way to a more subdued and reflective demeanor behind bars. Although the prison system offered him counseling, it did little to mitigate the burden of his actions. Meanwhile, Alan Henderson, Harold's twin, faced the challenging aftermath of the trial and his brother's conviction. Although Alan Henderson was cleared of any involvement in Julie's murder, the case had deeply affected him. Emotionally drained, he retreated from the social scene and focused on personal reflection. Alan continued to live in Payette, maintaining his quiet and reserved demeanor. The community showed its support for Alan, recognizing that he too had been a victim of Harold's actions. Over time, Payette began to heal, with residents coming together to support one another. The town's recovery was characterized by a renewed sense of unity and compassion. Julie Lewis's memory was honored through scholarships and charity events, serving as a lasting reminder of her life and the impact of her tragic death. These efforts helped to ensure that her legacy continued to inspire and support the community.